I thought that was a very visually appeasing way to put that. But we do have some great questions, not only from educators within New Jersey, but across the United States.
Right?
And in the form, and I'll start off with this first question. The first question is, how can teachers measure the growth of our students when applying social emotional competencies?
You know, the short answer is with your eyes, with your ears, with your heart. Social emotional learning isn't something that we have to somehow excavate. We see it in the kids all the time. The key thing, though, is that when schools decide that they're going to promote SEL, they need to decide, what do we want to focus on? What skills are going to be our focal skills? And what do we expect to see with kids at different age levels? And I don't mean to cop out on the answer, but the answer is developmental, because what you're going to look for in a kindergarten kid is not going to be what you look for in a high school kid. For example, a young child, if you want to know if that child has empathy, you don't judge it by whether the child goes up to a classmate who's hurt. You judge it by whether a child goes up when the child is encouraged to go up. And we don't expect very young kids to go up to classmates who are hurt. Some might, but it's very unusual. And it's because it's a little scary. But when they're encouraged, if they do it, they've got a good skill set. On the other hand, if you're a high school kid and your classmate's hurting right next to you and you ignore it, we got to wonder a little bit about your empathy. So, these are things that are part of our everyday life. Remember, what is SEL about? Do you know how to work in a group? Do you know how to organize yourself? Are you aware of your feelings and how you transmit your feelings and communicate your feelings? Teachers have been giving kids feedback about that for many, many, many decades. Now it's just a matter of being more systematic and then linking it to instruction.
Absolutely. I think, when we talk about assessing group work and really having everyone accountable for their part, I think that's part of, implementing social emotional learning, especially at your middle school and elementary school, upper elementary school levels. Um, what are some of the most common misconceptions about implementing SEL competencies within our classrooms? That was a big one.
Yeah, well, common misconceptions are that that you could do it in a kind of a limited way, that it's different from every other subject area. So if you think about it, you wouldn't teach reading for 1 year and expect your kids to be literate. You wouldn't teach your kids reading 1 day a week without some sort of continuity and thread from one to the next. And I guess I would say the most common thing about SEL is that it's different from any other skill. Common misconception, but it's not. If we want our kids to learn skills, we've got to give them the opportunity to learn, practice over time, prompt and cue and reinforce. I will say that's another misconception. So I would just invite anybody that wants to do SEL with your kids to do what I do, which is imagine your kids are amnesiacs. Amnesia. So that means that as soon as you teach something to them, they forget it. Okay, so then you have to say, well, how am I going to get them to remember it? That's exactly the point. That you have an SEL lesson today. If you want them to remember it tomorrow, you got to figure out how you're going to remind them. And the more you do those reminders, the more the kids start telling themselves the reminders. And that's when you get internalization and generalization of the skills. It takes a while to do that. We sometimes want progress very fast, but no teacher in 1 year is going to make their kid into a full socially competent human being. We're all works in progress with regard to this. So I think those are some of the misconceptions about SEL.
I think we can probably apply that to adults as well. I think, that we're all works in progress. And with that being said, I know there is a lot of chatter about how districts can find ways to support social emotional competencies within their staff. So would you have any ideas on what districts can do to support their teachers when it comes to their social emotional growth and their emotional intelligence as well?
Yeah, well, I think that there are a lot of examples. One that just comes right to mind because I've seen it is West Windsor Plainsboro, where they have mindfulness breaks regularly throughout the day for staff as well as kids, and they do other things intentionally to give staff opportunities for wellness in the course of the day. And I think that's very important. That it's something that's built into the structure of the day and not something that you expect people to do on their own time. So so I think there are ways to do that creatively. I do think that the data are very clear that mindfulness, even though it may only take a couple of minutes, is very, very powerful as a form of stress relief. And especially as we go back in 2021, there's going to be a good need for stress relief. And so for both kids and for staff to have periodic opportunities for mindfulness would be great. And the other thing that I want to also mention for adults as well as kids is to not lose sight of strengths. Especially for kids, the school day can feel like a day where I spend most of my day with what I don't know. So what am I going to feel comfortable about what I do know? And I think in a similar way for staff, supervisors need to be attentive to what is it that staff really like to do, and are they getting the opportunity to do it? In some businesses, they allocate an hour or two in the week for their employees to do what they want. And that turns out to be very productive for the employees, for the company, et cetera. Well, I work with a bunch of schools in Israel that did a similar thing, where they allocated, what would be the equivalent to our Friday afternoon, to have kids and staff work together on projects of common interest. And so much learning went on in that period of time. But more than that, it was an opportunity for people to do what they really like to do. And every week when you know you're going to have that opportunity, it sustains you. But one of the things that we're doing now a little bit too much of is we are getting rid of things like music and art because we feel like we got to make more time for academics. For some of our kids, we're taking away their lifeline. So we want to rethink that and make sure that everybody, staff and kids, are having the opportunity to engage in their strengths. A little bit of that goes an incredibly long way.
And I have to echo that sentiment. As you see behind me, music was a integral part of why I came to school, why I performed well in school, and it continues to be a tool for me to use in my pedagogy. And I have to agree with that. The arts are extremely important when we give an opportunity for our students to express themselves
Yep.
artistically, whether it be the performing arts, something that I was very near and dear to my heart, or visual art, who I know
Right.
many of my fifth grade students are very into visual art, and even graphic art and design nowadays. Um,
Yep.
those things are very important.
Yeah.
I I have a question on autism and significant disabilities. So, how do we incorporate SEL competencies for those with autism or other significant disabilities?
Okay. So here again, goes back to what we were saying before, that SEL is fundamental to everything we do interpersonally. Now, one of the areas that's implicated, for a number of kids on the autistic spectrum is difficulty dealing with their feelings, difficulty recognizing feelings in others, difficulty being able to recognize and label their own feelings, which is a very basic SEL skill. Now, the difference is that when kids have certain disabilities, it will take them longer to learn. I mean, that's just something we have to accept. And so we have to break down stuff into smaller units. We're going to have to repeat more often. We're going to have to extend the range of practice contexts for kids so that we're preparing them for situations in which they can be successful. But SEL is at the fundamental core of this. Just think about any diagnostic label that you want to give a kid. Not that you want to give a kid a label, but if a kid's behaviorally or emotionally troubled, SEL is part of the solution. If they've got communication issues, SEL is part of the solution. On the autistic spectrum, part of the solution. ADHD, part of the solution. So it just means that we have to break it down, put in more repetition, more practice, more attention to generalization, and we have to give the kids even more reminders, right? If I've got a kid in a group and we had a very successful group and a kid gets sent back to class, and I think that kid's going to carry the skills back to class, I got another thing coming. So I have to be preparing the teacher that the kid's going back to for what we did in the group. And how is the teacher going to prompt those skills? And if the kid doesn't show the skills, how are we going to handle all that? See, these are all predictable things. And I will say, we have in New Jersey so many schools of character, so many effective SEL schools that you can find in practice examples of almost anything you want to see. And there's nothing better than a good living example to give you clues for how to adjust your practice.
Thank you for that response. I want to shift and really talk about the home life in our community, and really how can parents or primary caretakers help move or help the SEL competencies at home? How can they help reinstate? What type of literature can or resources can teachers offer to our parents to really bridge that learning from school to home and back?
Right. A number of very good SEL programs, social decision making, social problem solving, open circle, I can problem solve. They have components for parents. They have things that get sent home to show the parents, here's what we're working on in school, and here's how you can support that at home. So that's very valuable. But more than that, parents need to be connected with each other. And I think this is a unique role the schools can play, is arranging ongoing meetings for parents to support parents in the work of SEL. And because I think it's in the interest of the school and in the interest of the parents, that I would joke sometimes when I work with groups of parents that they'd all be sitting around the table, and I'd say, at this table is one good parent, and by that I mean that among all of you, you know how to deal with every parenting situation, but individually we don't know how to deal with every parenting situation. But we don't have a forum to ask a parent. So what would you do? How do you handle that? So parent sharing is very, very powerful. And I think we could do better with newsletters. And now that so many people are into Zoom in a way they weren't before, I think that schools can be reaching a lot of parents by offering periodic Zoom-based workshops that make it a lot easier for parents than actually having to come into the school building. So I think there's a lot. And I'm going to immodestly say that there's a book called Emotionally Intelligent Parenting that many parents might find to be a good resource. And in Kindle, it's in Spanish. So there are resources out there for parents. There's a website called the Parent Toolkit that has phenomenal videos and resources for parents. There's a lot out there for parents to look at. But as I said, it's not so easy for parents to do this on their own. Having the support of other parents and the support of the school is really critical.
Absolutely. And I think that most of us who are teachers are also parents. I think it's very important for us to look at it in a different lens as well as a parent with our own children at home. You mentioned the pandemic, and one of the benefits of having this virtual forum to reach a broader audience. But I want to know, um, in this environment, right, the changes that the pandemic has created within our teaching and learning environments, what are some ways SEL practices can be adapted or approached differently, and still achieve the benefits as if we were in person on a remote learning environment or a hybrid learning environment?
Right. Well, you know, um, I don't know that we would say that anything is going to be a direct substitute for that person-to-person contact. But I think that we've found that a lot more can happen on Zoom than we would have thought. And partly it's because you can put kids into chat rooms and they can have conversations, breakout rooms, they can have conversations. Because it's so interesting, especially for kids in the secondary level. When a teacher asks a question in the classroom, a couple of kids respond. But when you're on Zoom, you can ask every child to put something in the chat box. Doesn't mean you're going to call on them to talk about it, but it means that they are going to have to think about it. And this is really why learning is so connected to the degree of participation. It's not connected to how much time you physically are in the school. If you're not thinking about the school, if you're not thinking about what's going on, if you're only worried about, well, what am I going to say when it's my turn? So as we can use Zoom to do things like get more kids to participate, spend more time in groups, we will be able to make up for some of the things that we're lacking when we don't have that person-to-person contact. But at the end of the day, and certainly in the early grades, a hug goes very far, and that you just cannot quite do on Zoom.
And I have to agree. I think most teachers do that. Being social beings, like human beings, there's a lot that I can read from a child just from the way that their forehead wrinkles or the way that they smile.
That's right.
And that really gauges or helps me uncover anything that might be wrong with the child socially or emotionally. And they wouldn't even have to say a word. That's me just knowing my students.
That's
And,
right.
that body language and that facial language is something that I truly miss.
Right. And I would say, look, this is what our teachers do. I think some people don't always appreciate that, but our teachers are not just teaching subject area; they're teaching children, and their attentiveness to children is going to be what determines their outcomes, not their attentiveness to the curricular outline in and of itself.
So I wanted to go a bit further. I wanted to know, how does strengthening the social emotional learning of a student transition into real world applications after public school education?
Right. So there's very important data that the kids' social and emotional competencies turns out to be one of the biggest predictors of a college dropout. See, we can get kids to the college. See, we have to rethink the whole access idea, because access is necessary but not sufficient. We get the kids to the college door, but then they don't graduate. Have we done a good job for them? It turns out that what really determines how well you get through college is your ability to know how to deal with life in college. One of the old statistics, you may have heard this, is a big predictor of college is whether you go to office hours of your professors. And so to think about it, what skills do you need? You got to track these people down, right? You got to make an appointment. You got to show up on time. And then you have to learn how to converse with somebody that you may be intimidated by and may have no interest in. These are important life skills. So if you could do all that, that's good. And kids have to learn how to manage money in college. They have to learn how to manage time in college. They have to learn how to choose their friendships in college. And if they can't do that, they're gone. So that's one thing. The other thing we know is from all the new emerging literature about the workplace. Who advances in their job? It's not the smartest person. It's the person with the most emotional intelligence, with the social emotional learning skills. Look, just anybody who's listening, think about the people you most like to work with in your workplace. I guarantee you that they're not necessarily the smartest, but they are the ones with good social and emotional skills. They're the ones that you can rely on. They're the ones that you enjoy. They're the ones that pay attention to you. They listen to you. They know how to work with you. They know how to read your feelings. So workplace success and college success through more rigorous courses, SEL.
Absolutely. You said something about financial intelligence as well being a part of this and really managing their lifestyle. And I think that also goes through life in general in different social circles. You touched upon social emotional learning and equity becoming interwoven within itself, and something that I believe most teacher circles are seeing how they are relating to each other. Can you expand a little bit more about what social emotional learning means when it comes to equity? How do we approach that in an equitable fashion?
Right. Look, the situations relating to equity are structural. And we don't want to pretend that by giving kids a lot of SEL that somehow we're going to level the playing field. There are bigger issues that we have to deal with. However, in a school, in a classroom, learning how to treat one another fairly, respectfully, civilly, we can expect that. We can expect that no matter what goes on outside. Kids can code switch. And so the essence of equity is empathy and perspective taking.
And I like how you definitely you made a clear vision of how they both work together and how they supplement each other. Um, what is one practice, if you wanted to give one practice for maybe a teacher who has not jumped into the social emotional competencies and social emotional learning, what is one practice they can start tomorrow in their classroom in front of their students that could make somewhat of a difference and gear them in the right direction when it comes to social emotional learning?
I would say one of two things: either bring the kids an incredibly wonderful treat, or bring them each $100 bill, and you could do that tomorrow, and the kids would be thrilled. In all seriousness, there's really nothing you could do tomorrow when you're brand new. And the reason is, for example, I would say do mindfulness with the kids. Very important. But if you've never done it before, don't start doing it tomorrow. Practice for a week and then do it. The key thing that I think we can do, like going into the fall, is focusing on feelings. So it's give kids opportunities for mindfulness, learn how to do feelings check in, check out with your kids, whether it's through a morning meeting, or whether it's through a quick write, or through a journal, or through a chart. There's a lot of material relating to this in the Social Emotional Learning Lab by Victoria Podobecki, recent fabulous tools for all these kinds of things. That's the issue, is learn how to attend to your kids' feelings and give them voice to their feelings. That would be the number one thing that will make a difference in the fall.
Yeah, you mentioned morning meeting, and from a teacher's perspective, I think morning meeting was just as beneficial to me as it was to them. One, because I got to learn a lot about their lives, about what made them happy outside of school, and two, because it really uh, gave me time outside of the classroom just to see, just to be human and not the teacher, just to be human and just with them. And I love the morning meeting process.
Right. My colleagues and I, with the work that we started in Jersey City Public Schools on SEL, developed this concept of morning classroom conversations, which really is kind of an extension of morning meeting, but to also build conversation skills among kids, because this is another area where our kids are sometimes can use a little advancement. Conversation becomes really important for interviews, for workplace stuff, so many areas. And, that's the downside of our technology, is that it creates fewer opportunities for interpersonal conversation. And yet interpersonal conversation is going to become increasingly important. So so I think morning meetings, morning classroom conversations, those technologies which are quick, but happen a lot, can be very powerful SEL tools.
Absolutely. We have one more question for you, and it's really about the future. Can you share a bit about any new emerging trends to be on the lookout for within the field of SEL, as well as any areas presenting opportunities for future growth?
Well, I think we're seeing a lot more gamification of SEL and attempts to try to take advantage of technology to teach SEL. It's not clear where that's going to go, but there's definitely a greater and greater interest in it. There are places like Classcraft that have created virtual systems, classroom systems for SEL. These things are only now starting to be evaluated, but I do see a lot more of that coming in. The other trend that I'm seeing, quite honestly, is this integration of SEL and character. And that is what we call social, emotional, and character development. Not seeing those as separate, but seeing those as united, again, like the idea of the ship with propeller and rudder, and that sense of purpose. That's something that is going to become a bigger and bigger part of what we all mean by SEL. In that what am I going to use these skills for? I mean, if I don't think I'm going anyplace, why would I want to use these skills? And I think that's a very legitimate thing, which is why, again, we say inspiration has to precede remediation. I see us having more emphasis on trying to inspire our kids. And as we open them up, they will be more receptive to SEL and to other learning.
Thank you so much, Dr. Maurice, Elias. It's been a pleasure and an honor to share this sentiment and learn so much from this discussion. I could say in this hour, it was an insightful professional development that I haven't had one like this in a long time.
Well, I appreciate it, and I respect greatly that plaque that you have over your left shoulder, I believe it is,
Yeah.
in recognition of your teaching excellence.
Thank you.
Which I think is a great thing to be proud of.
And once again, we thank you for your dedication, your research, and your time to this very important topic for our schools and for our faculty and staff, and most importantly, for our students and our families. For those of us who have watched this luncheon with Dr. Maurice Elias, please feel free to follow his social media tags. We have Twitter at SECD Lab and another Twitter handle at SEL in Schools. And please visit sel4nj.org. We'll have all this information tagged in the captions of this video. But once again, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. And you have a great week.
Thank you. You too. Take care.